Hello and welcome to a Second Thoughts overview of Boris Ursus of Kislev. I went through the initial turns and checked out how the faction plays out, and how different or similar it is to Tsarina's or Konstantin's faction. In the end, I'll give you some army compositions that I would try, and you can change and adapt those, of course, to your own playstyle. Like I always mentioned, this is not intended to be an in-depth guide, although it has elements of it, and you'll certainly have a better grasp of the faction in the end. Let's play then with Boris Ursus of Kislev. So for your short victory, you need to destroy the factions of the Warhost of the Apocalypse, Mr. Archeon, and the Bloody Sword. We also need to occupy, loot, raise or sack 30 different settlements. Achieving this will give us a +3 hero recruit capacity. Now this is great to avoid having to build up too many buildings for it, as I always say, but considering the ice court mechanic, it is actually even more helpful for Kislev. Now, short victory does seem to be quite straightforward. I mean, your enemies are very close, dominate the north, etc. It is, however, quite hard given the location, especially concerning climate, as you can see here. Now, long victory requires you to achieve the short victory condition, to occupy, loot, raise or sack 70 different settlements, and then to destroy the Legions of Chaos, basically Daniel, as we like to call him, Wintertooth, basically Throg, look at it here, and then the Heralds of the Tempest on the other side. This is quite a long victory condition required because, well, at least you have to move into 2 different directions, conquer Norska probably or likely, so yeah, it's going to be quite a while before you can even move over there, or maybe you have to go over here and you have to postpone invasion of this side, so it's going to take a while. Achieving it, +10 hero recruit rank as always, ensuring your heroes are great as they start, especially useful for casters. Now, Boris Ursus is the High Priest of Ursun. He enjoys having diplomatic relations +30 with the Ice Court, so that is helpful later on for any confederation possibilities. He also has the difference that settlements in Chaos Wasteland climates receive reduced climate penalties and actually generate devotion, so he has access to a little bit more devotion, which is nice. Construction costs reduced for garrison and religion buildings, and construction time -1 for province capital settlement buildings. Now this all helps him secure a little bit better the north, basically, but he's still quite weak in that regard. It's difficult. Now, the important one is recruit rank +2 for Warbear Rider units. So, of course, this slight focus on the Warbear Riders, as if they weren't powerful enough, he's going to start with them a little bit more powerful just because of that. In terms of climates, now let's show the main issue. So, basically, of course, you do start in the north and you have to conquer mostly unpleasant climate. It's still better than the other Kislev factions, but yeah, it's still a problem, and this is one of the reasons why this faction is quite difficult to play. Still, he does gain some devotion, which is nice, but all of those bad effects will always be into place from turn 1, really. Never mind uninhabitable climate being frozen, and it's not, this is just, let's say, placemaker, but placeholder, sorry, placemaker. But basically that's the idea. So as in, there are some territories such as the magical forest and the desert down here that it's uninhabitable, but for the most part you'll have pleasant or unpleasant climate, which should be nice, unless the issue is that, well, you kind of have to go and conquer the south if you want good climate. So yeah, it's still a better faction than Konstantin's or Tsarina's, just to conquer the whole map. So if you really wish to conquer the whole map with Kislev, by all means go with Boris. That will be my advice. Your starting location is quite difficult. Actually, you're surrounded by enemies and it is difficult to consolidate a base of operations even. Allies are not nearby, so although you do have Krakadak here, they won't survive for long for sure. What you should always aim is to have a little bit of some treaties with them, so that you can get better relations with other dwarf factions later on, but don't count on them for providing too much assistance in the early game for sure. If they manage, by all means, of course. You do not even start with any settlements. I just conquered this one, but the only good idea is that you do have a 4-settlement province, even though the issue is that it is already in unpleasant climate. So you can see the problem with Boris right away, right? Now, It does help you in building a good military right away, and one important detail is how basically you're already surrounded. You're already surrounded with other demonic factions. It's about fighting. Just try not to get into both sides of the expansion, because that will be problematic. Typical expansion, then control the initial province and then decide. Most likely you're going to go against Archeon because he's going to fight you anyways, and then perhaps into the Cathay area so that you can find some friends there, or maybe you would like to double down and go on the other side as well. It is tricky, but I'm sure that you will be able to do it. Diplomatically, you're part of the Order Tide. So anything from the Empire factions, from Bretonia even later on, from the Dwarves, Cathay nearby over here, yep, basically those will be your friends, the Order Tide. And your enemies, of course, the Chaos. You're surrounded by Chaos, which is a bit of a problem. Don't count on your allies or your possible friends, because they're going to be too far to aid you, especially early game. You're alone. Now, if you manage, of course, have a hero just try and go over here to try and find out the other factions so that you can actually start building up those outposts, those military alliances. And if you manage some outposts, here's some ideas. Artillery, of course, from the Empire or the Dwarven factions, and even from Cathay. And some heavy infantry from the Dwarves, of course. You do have your own heavy infantry, of course, but theirs are always better if you manage to get them. Especially some Slayers are always nice. And in addition, you may also have some single entities or some flying units from Cathay, which you do lack. So by all means, if you manage to have those, they're likely to be a good addition for your armies. So as for mechanics, they have Devotion. It is a unique currency that allows invocations which act very similar to rights here in the Motherland menu. So you can choose Celiac, which gives you growth, casualty replenishment rate. You can choose Daz, which gives you income from trade and income from all buildings. You can choose Ursun, that causes attrition to enemy armies. Don't neglect this one. It's really good for you to try and ensure that the enemy doesn't have an easier time conquering you. And then Tor, which gives you the army ability and a melee attack for all armies. All of these also give you supporters. Tor, for instance, gives you +2 when fighting a battle. Ursun, +5 when occupying a settlement. So if you're about to occupy several settlements, by all means, you can also go for that idea. Celiac gives you +1 when gaining a character rank. And then Daz, +1 when constructing a building. What do you do with the supporters? Basically, you either devote them to the Ice Court or to the Great Orthodoxy. That's how you participate. You gift some of these supporters, and by doing so, of course, you're going to get better relations with the Ice Court or better relations with the Great Orthodoxy as the race finishes. Once it does finish, basically you'll have a better chance of perhaps confederating them, so granting you a better chance of getting a huge land mass from the other Kislev factions, if of course they're still alive and if they're kicking it, of course. Now, in terms of the Ice Court mechanic, basically this one allows you to choose what their starting traits of your characters will be, for instance, of your Frost Maiden heroes, such as I have here, or the Icy Witch Lords. Now I have to select from her having Perfect Vigor or her having Vanguard Deployment. Since she's a caster, I believe it will be better for giving her Vanguard Deployment. She can go immediately, take over any specific deficiencies of the enemy, and then fall back to ensure that she doesn't get killed or anything like that, while still having used that spell. So that's the sort of idea that I'm going for in this case. Now, as for the Atamans, what do we have in the Atamans? One per 2 provinces, that's how it works, and you'll be able to assign one Ataman, and then they will give better effects to your provinces. In this case, this Ataman here is giving this better control, it's giving best corruption details. I wanted him here to ensure that the corruption from this side wouldn't cause any issues to my faction, to my territories here. But I could have gone with more income, I could have gone with more growth. It's really up to you. Depends on what you're aiming for. Then, of course, similar to the Ice Witch, you'll be able to give them traits as they level up, which is really cool. Now, finally, a sort of a mechanic on their own is I'll show you from the technology menu, is the 3 cities of Kislev, Erengrad and Prague. Basically, they act as great places for you to build up your forces, so I will always advise you to try and conquer the Kislev area, or to confederate, of course, because all of those places are great for your army building. They have special buildings for it. Since you're Boris, you're kind of out of the way for that, but only for the, let's say, until the mid-game. In the mid-game, you'll most likely try to get the Kislev factions confederated, so go for that, of course. For your province edicts, we have the control and less movement range for enemy armies. Don't neglect this. This is particularly useful if you're under attack in a specific area, just to ensure that they always have that little bit of an issue trying to move around. Now, in terms of the others, recruitment cost minus 10% and local recruitment capacity, note, +2. This is important. When you're recruiting, you may wish to have this just to ensure that you get to that 20 stack as soon as possible. You also have chance of a plague spreading, minus 40%. This will probably become useful now that I'm fighting a Nurgle faction. So yeah, always situational. But also with the hero recruit rank, lesser corruption and hero recruitment cost. So if you're just about finishing up the Ice Court mechanic, pop this one up, ensure that you get that little bit extra for your hero recruits in terms of your hero and the rank, which is always excellent. Finally, you have a basic one, income from all buildings plus 5%. They're all very decent, but note the lack of growth, lack of research, which would be really useful for Kislev, but well, we can't have everything. Now, in terms of army stances, quite basic selection. We have channeling for more winds of magic at the cost of 10% movement range, and camp for 50% movement range, but you also have enables replenishment, access to global recruitment, and of course immune to most attrition. This is always excellent. Then we have raiding, giving immunity to post attrition as well, lesser campaign movement, and it still costs 50% to select it, of course. And then we have ambush for 25%, and forced march, the typical ones. So nothing to see here really, but they're always useful, and particularly here in the wastelands you can see the biggest issue with the Chaos Wastes is that they'll cause attrition, so you gotta be careful with that. So in terms of buildings, there are really no special buildings nearby to aid Boris. Most are located in the 3 main cities, which Boris will need time to reach. Militarily, he requires 6 buildings for full military, with 4 having to be built on the main capital, which is quite a little bit of a problem. Your income-focused buildings may have to wait a little bit so that you can, get better units overall. In terms of infrastructure, the Kislev actually has good places. Honestly, they have great buildings. So let's start with one that provides income, growth, and less recruitment costs. Nothing bad, always really good to have. Then you can also have more casualty replenishment rate, more ambush success chance, lesser corruption, more devotion, and the income from farms increased. So if you build a farm, make sure that you have at least a little bit of some hallowed forests there. Now, you also have Gospoda for control and growth, so you have 2 buildings that provide growth. Remember that. And in addition, you also have the Orthodoxy Church. So this is useful for devotion, supporters, control. It also unlocks an important hero, which is the Patriarch. He is important because of the replenishment, because of the healing possibilities that he has. So don't neglect that. And of course, minus corruption. All good stuff. Then we finally have an income-based building. So yeah, overall it seems we have nearly one for everything, but the key problem with Kislev, you cannot build everything at once. You will have to choose really well early on. So yeah, that's the main issue that I find with any Kislev faction. They do have all the buildings, all the tools for it, but early on it's really important that you choose well. Now, in terms of research, it's rather average. I'll explain why. There's lots of stuff, but you actually need to control the specific province, the specific city that you see here of Kislev or of Erengrad or of Prague to access these ones, which is a bit of a problem, especially for Boris. Of course, you have plenty of text to go for while you're aiming for that. But yeah, it's a little bit of an issue. If you don't get to Kislev, Erengrad or Prague, you're locked out of those texts, so yeah, you gotta be able to do that. In terms of the specific ones, you do have some nice growth, some nice casualty replenishment rate, some good buffs for some of the specific units. So they don't have a lot of them, but at least they come really close, really fast. As in, you can immediately go for hooked X blades there, can immediately go for some more campaign movement range. So yeah, that's the sort of idea here. But for the most part, don't expect for your army to become really powerful immediately with just a couple of attacks. It's gonna take a while. Now, in terms of skills, as you always know, you have the Lord-specific ones, the yellow line or the combat line, let's say. You have your army line or the red line as it's called, and you have the blue line or the campaign one. Let's start with the blue line. It is lacking a little bit. And mostly it does have the Logistician here for casualty replenishment rate, which I always love, and Quartermaster. Of course, you may wish to go for Lightning Strike, but at the cost of so many skill points that you may not wish to go there. Nothing really interesting here in the beginning, except maybe for the attrition casualties, especially without Boris, because of all the Chaos Wastelands that you have to go through, so they do suffer a little bit less of attrition, but that's up to you. Now, in terms of the red line, we do have great decisions. In essence, they have all the elites, kind of like 3 of them. So that's always useful. That's always useful to use, and especially with Boris here, that he has, you know, better war bears, better elemental war bears, better Tsar guards. You can definitely do a good army just with those, and he gives them regeneration for the elemental bears. So you can see the idea here with Boris already starting to focus. Now, in terms of the heroes, don't forget that the patriarchs do have the possibility at rank 20 to select 1 extra stuff to help. 1 extra skill that will help your playstyle. I typically go with his ability of regeneration, which is always excellent. It's a good heal, it's always useful to have in battle, and he's also great at replenishing troops and cleansing corruption, and he can ride a war bear. Do you need anything further from these guys? Of course, the Frost Maidens, they also not only are casters, but they also have their starting traits due to the Ice Court mechanic. So in terms of heroes, you're always good with those units. Now, in terms of the units, I didn't mention before, but let me speak. In terms of tier 2 and 3 units, you already have quite a composition. You can have Streltsy, a good armor-piercing ranged unit. You can have your cavalry, your winged lances, a good charge shock cavalry indeed, always on the rear of the enemy or on the flank, of course, for maximum output. You do have the Tsar Guard, either with great weapons or shielded, a very good holding infantry and a very good armor-piercing infantry. It's always nice. And finally, you still have the light war sleds. So all of these units are really good for the early to mid-game. You can do a lot of compositions with them, and then of course move on to the higher tier 4, tier 5 units, which are definitely better, but still don't neglect the tier 3 to 2 units. So here are all the red line skills for the Kislev armies. A good note is that there are some great combinations of armor-piercing, missiles, and anti-large, even with just a few skill points, which helps a lot, really. Now, Boris does give decent buffs to mostly war bears, elemental bears, but he also gives them to the Tsar Guard units here. He also gives regeneration for elemental bears, so of course a couple of combinations using that, it's always nice. This is more of a melee focused build, focused solely on the war bears, on the elementals, and just some infantry for good measure, but you can definitely have some missiles included there. Maybe even 5, 6 units, depends on how you play. Notice how they are quite effective in terms of red line skills. Anything below 15 or equal, I always consider to be quite effective, by the way. So, these are some possibilities for you. You're welcoming to change a little bit as you wish, and of course in the early game you won't have these units, but this is a good way to have something to aim for. Now, other army possibilities, this is more of a generic idea, either going with some Ice Guards, some Tsar Guards, and then some Bears, or going more into the Ice Guards with the Sleds idea, because they're kind of divided. You know, the skill line that buffs these guys, it's different than the one that buffs these guys. You can also have a completely mobile force, you know, ready to ambush, ready to just have some nice bland battles with, by all means, if you manage to have fun with that, yeah, that's the idea, isn't it? And still, these are a couple of sweeper armies, or maybe initial armies. So as in for the armored Cossars with Streltsy, and then some bears if you manage. You can replace these with some cavalry units in the beginning and have something like this, which is more of a tier 2-3 army that you can use definitely in the beginning, and you can still use it really well into the late game, especially with all the buffs as you've seen. Now, this one is just to show how a more elite army with some non-elite units is kind of costly in terms of redline skills, which is quite of a problem for the Kislev faction, and that's the general idea. It kind of focuses you into upgrading your units, or already staying with a tier 2 to 3 units to have like a sweeper army, an army that is not going to fight chaos chosen units for sure, but they are going to do well against minor armies or settlements. So, what is Boris all about? It's a good chance to have a change of pace for a Kislev campaign. It's a much better option in terms of dominating the whole map just because of the climate suitability, and after you overcome the initial main powerhouses of the Warriors of Chaos, it will likely get easier actually. So, expansion is quite tricky, of course, because you may suffer incursions from the one direction, from the other direction, wars into several fronts. It may be difficult if they are invading from the sea, but that's the general idea with Kislev. You're always fighting, definitely. Now, do not neglect a chance to control the Kislev area in itself, by all means. But yeah, it's good that you don't have to worry too much about this mechanic. It's bad that you don't have it too much, but still, it's always a nice idea to have more of a force, brute action faction choice, which is definitely how it works here for Boris. Now, everything really synergizes well, as I have said before in others, but Boris has the bonus of not having to worry too much about certain things, such as the climate, so it's quite thematic, quite interesting. Just go and beat chaos all the way. Now, your army does consist of good hybrid infantry, great cavalry, great single entities, good chariots. They do like flying, and you only have access to specific lores of magic. Now, replenishment is great. He gets a bit less trouble, like I said, due to climate, which helps cement this campaign as likely the easier to conquer the whole map. I cannot stress it enough, especially if you're a veteran player, by all means. If you're not, just let easy difficulty, normal difficulty, and you'll for sure have a good time with the faction. So, I believe now it is time to devote yourself to help Boris Ursus against the forces of chaos.